And welcome to Hashem's podcast. It's 11 a.m. Melbourne, Sydney time. It's very late here in Cairo, but we're lucky enough to be speaking with John Stapleton, who spent a quarter of a century working as a general news reporter for two of Australia's leading mastheads, Sydney Morning Herald and The Australian. He is currently the editor of A Sense of Place magazine and is the author of a number of books, including Terrorism in Australia, Workers' Paradise Lost, and Unfolding Catastrophe, Australia, Agent Range, Hideout in the Apocalypse, Dark Policing, Unfolding Catastrophe, and many more. Very glad to be chatting with one of Australia's most experienced journalists, author John Stapleton. Don't mix John Stapleton with the English John Martin Stapleton, who passed last year, who was on TV and on things like Nationwide and BBC. So we're speaking to the Australian John Stapleton, whose novels and techniques in writing depict Australia and other world issues with hallucinatory intensity. So, good morning, John. Thank you for being on our
Yeah,
show.
good morning. Yeah, thanks very much for the invite. Nice to
Yeah,
see you.
awesome. So, can you tell us a little bit about your history? You basically got into journalism and short story writing when you found out you can make some money out of short story writing. And this was back in the 70s, wasn't it?
Oh, I was just one of those mad little kids that was always pestering the English teacher for more books to read and was scribbling away from a really young age, sending stories off to Reader's Digest and various things right from, 10, 12 years old and just scribbling away. I was always scribbling away I got a lot of rejection slips as a teenager, that's for sure, and as a young person, and finally co-won a short story competition in '74, I think it was, for the Adelaide Festival, which was then the premium arts event in Australia, and it was. That was the first money I'd ever made, and it was $175 or something, because
Wow.
we shared the prize, and that was like a revelation. You could make money out of something that I like to do. So, and away it went from there. Did all sorts of things, all sorts of things.
Yeah. Do you remember what the first story was? Like, what was the
Yeah, it
inspiration
was
behind it?
about a friend of mine who was, well, it was the '70s, so everybody was off their chops, and he was particularly off his chops, this friend of mine, and he was well known in the local pub, and it was just about him, really, and his slow decline. Uh, well, not so slow decline in the end. And a lot of those people who partied hard back in the '70s are all passed away now. They all died young from AIDS and overdoses and all the rest of the afflictions of the era. And yeah, not everyone survived the lifestyle. Let's say that.
Yes, for
But
sure.
yeah, so it was basically about that.
Yeah, no, I just had a chat before the podcast began. Today is the 50th anniversary of AC/DC storming into Swanston Street back in 50 years ago, and the amazing Bon Scott and the team there singing away on Swanston Street. So it was a great time to be alive. You were there. How did you move on to journalism after writing the short story?
Well, I was living in Adelaide in the '70s, in love, in a regional town, because I grew up in Sydney, and it was there was a local music magazine called Roadrunner, and I discovered that even though I did a lot of it, but I really had no talent for it. But they always published my work, because one thing about rock mags, and there's a lot of writers have followed this path, um, that the rock mags publish everything because they're always desperate for copy, and they never pay very well, if they pay at all. But it's just that act of getting your stuff published. One story leads to another, and I was really no music expert, and I made some fairly obvious mistakes. But then you got free tickets, you got free records, you got out and about, you were in the milieu, and it was kind of fun. I interviewed Nick Cave, the now very famous Nick Cave, when he
Yep.
was about 20, he would have been, and he was in a band called the Boys Next Door, which I later interviewed him in London backstage, in a more gothic era of his, and he was
Wow.
very embarrassed. He looks around, when I mentioned the Boys Next Door, like it was an embarrassingly, quaint past. But they were a great band actually, and he was a great performer. Even then, he used to throw himself around the stage, and he was, as that book says, the boy on fire. He had a sort of monkey handsome, they say. He was a very handsome boy right from early on, and very a live wire. And that's a great book. I'm footnoted in The Boy on Wire by Mark Mordew, which is, I really chuffed about that, a little bit of history, because he really was one of Australia's greatest exports, is Nick Cave, and his recent albums have all been off the charts beautiful. So yeah,
He
yeah,
hasn't
it
put a
was.
foot wrong, has he, Nick Cave? In all of his music over the last 45 years, just keeps pumping them out. Yeah.
Yeah, well, he keeps going. He's that one of those born to it. It's his destiny, and his. Who else could go on and on about God and the ancient spirits or whatever in the way that he does? Galley ship and all that stuff. But but he gets not just gets away with it. It's and what's the word, anthematic or something, like it's like an anthem. Some of it is just beautiful. Some of it.
How did you move on to Sydney Morning Herald after that?
Um, Gosh, it was all a bit of it. I used to freelance for the Financial Review, which was a really serious publication. I just started freelancing, really. I used to, and I moved to London, so you could ring up and say, "Do you want an interview with Joseph Heller or someone like that?" Catch 22, and the papers back in Australia would just eat it up. And I discovered after a bit of trial and error and I would, because I was doing this, culture sort of column, arts column for the Financial Review. And so any PR person, you just say, well, I write for the Australian Financial Review. It's the equivalent of the London Financial Times, the one that was in pink. And they go, oh, and you'd get slotted straight in. So, yeah, Joseph Heller was it was great because by that stage I'd got used to it, and they'd always slot you in because you're from Australia. They'd always slot you in at the end of the day in a very unprestigious slot, but you'd get in. Norman Mailer and all the rest of the heroes of the day. But for Joseph Heller, I was a bit over it by that stage, and I said, "Well, nobody wants to be interviewed at 10 a.m. At that time, so they'd slotted me in at 9 a.m. And I said, nobody wants to do an interview at 9 a.m. So I ended up going to lunch with him, which was great. So it was just like, he was literally one of the most famous writers in the world at that point, after Catch 22. So we went to lunch and he was totally charming. I'd waded through some of his books, which some of his books are definitely a wade, but in
The,
person he was
the term
completely
catch
charming.
the term catch 22 was that coined from that novel?
Yes, 100%.
I remember the film. I remember it was a great scene in the film when the pilot didn't want to fly anymore, and he said, "I don't want to fly anymore." And he goes, "Why?" He goes, "I'm crazy." I said, "Well, you can't be crazy if you're flying." Remember that scene? It was the definition of
No,
catch.
I don't, but I
Great
remember the
scene.
book, and it's basically Catch 22, and it was a way of getting out of the army for those who don't remember. So you declare that you were insane and you didn't want to go and fight and die. To which they said, well, every sane person doesn't want to go and fight and die, so you're not insane at all. So you couldn't get out of the situation, that you'd been drafted into, because it was a perfectly normal response to freak out and not want to do it and try to pretend you're mad. So, yeah.
All right, and then what about the Australian? Was that also on a freelance basis?
The Australian newspaper.
Yeah.
No, I went on staff. Well, I was doing casual shifts at the Sydney Morning Herald in the 1980s, and I just and I used to do those more featurey sort of stuff, and a lot, and then one day the editor who I was friendly with, and he gave me a good run, he just said, John, you need to, they're going to sack all casuals. So, another cost saving effort, in the dying realms of newspapers. And so try and get on staff. So it was a strange thing. I can tell you my first front page and the day I got the job.
Yes, please, go on. Yeah, of course.
Okay. So, there was this Sundays. One of the reasons I got into the mainstream and was accepted was I was prepared to work Sunday shifts, right? Nobody wants to work a Sunday, not all the la-di-das of the Sydney Morning Herald, which was the Bible of the chattering classes back then. And so this Sunday, there's nothing going on as usual. And there was a women's uh, a registry of women in unorthodox jobs, women in plumbers, carpenters, all those sort of things, labourers. And the nasty government, which had been funding this registry of women in unorthodox jobs, had cut their funding. So they had a big meeting to um, to protest this and work out a way forward. And so we got sent along to cover it, me and the most foul-mouthed photographer in the whole newspaper. I mean, he could not say a single sentence without swearing. And, you'd be sacked and dismissed as a misogynist in these days. But there he is. And we show up late. We were always late because we were the Sydney Morning Herald. We were the prima donnas of Australian media. So we were always late, to everything. And there's a whole jam-packed room, sort of big bloody room, jam packed with women. We were the only two men there, and absolutely jam packed. And some woman's up the front going on about the evils of the patriarchy, and we sort of. Because we're the Sydney Morning Herald and we're they're basically their only hope of ever regaining any funding if they can get publicity. So we get shuffled right in and have to sit right in the middle of this seething sea of furious women, and going on busily taking notes and so on. And soon enough, this foul-mouthed photographer just says, mate, there's no picture here. Just look at them. And so he just gets up and leaves me and this even more seething bunch of furious women. He goes down the Opera House, gets this picture of this drop-dead gorgeous 20-year-old girl with her in the overalls was paint splattered across her, carrying a ladder in front of the Opera House. So that story just whistled onto the front page. I never did get a thank you from the women in unorthodox jobs model, but they got on the front page. And that same day when I went into work, I said the chief of staff reached across the news desk and said, "Congratulations, you got the job." So that's how I became a mainstream journalist, like
Wow.
a on-staff journalist back in the 80s. So it was women in unorthodox jobs, and they never did thank me for the front page.
Fantastic.
Oh, I was sitting there taking notes because they'd all heard him say what he said, which was, "There's no picture here. Look at them. They're ugly." It's just like, oh my God, I just had to sit there.
Wow. Was Jermaine Greer around back then? She was around back then, wasn't she?
75 was Jermaine Greer, yeah. So it was the full force of it, really. It just escalated over the years, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was the height of Jermaine Greer, and there was wave after wave. I've never quite been able to decipher what wave is what, but anyway, we are where we are now.
Yeah. So moving on from writing and journalism, the reason for writing your book. So let's go onto your books now. Let's talk about Thailand, Deadly Destination. So what was the inspiration for that? Was that after a trip or was it Was it stories
Well,
from?
I was living there for a while. When I retired in 2010, I just wanted out of here and out of the old life. And I went and lived in Bangkok for some years. And it's funny, some of the most obvious stories, they just tell themselves. And it was so obvious, this story, that more Australians are killed or die in Phuket, like 50 a year, than anywhere else in the world. But there's no travel warnings. The Department of Foreign Affairs never warns anyone. It's obvious if you spend time with the Thais and learn their language, very beautiful language. But I found it, most people find it insanely complex language, but very beautiful.
Yeah,
And the culture itself is also really beautiful and fascinating, and many
and great
Westerners
food and
are
great weather.
fascinated by it.
I spent a bit of time in Thailand. Yeah, great,
Oh, right,
really nice
yes.
people, and
Well, it becomes obvious when you spend a lot of time with them that they really don't like foreigners and regard being turned into, pool attendants and prostitutes in their own
yeah,
country is
yeah,
really uh, grinds away at them, and they really basically don't like foreigners. I can't do the Thai very well. My chop lung, I know, like foreigner. I'm
yeah.
sitting in a barber shop one day, and this woman just goes, my chop lung, and on and on about how she hates foreigners. And I said to the woman cutting my hair, um, you know, I understand what she's saying. And so she says something to the woman that's going on about how she hates foreigners. And it's, my Sanjay, I not care. Chop lung, I know like foreigner. And away she goes. You'll have to forgive the Thai accent because it's
Yeah, yeah,
terrible.
yeah. Same thing happened to me when I first came to Egypt. I said, "Oh, to understand Egypt, I need to live with the original people." So we have a original people here called Nubians. And they come from a place called Upper Egypt. Now, the Nubian, I'll just quickly tell you, Nubians. I won't take much time. They don't consider themselves fully Egyptian. They have their own flag, their own language, even though they're in Egypt. And they were so nice to me at the beginning. And I found it great. And I even wanted to buy a house there, a small little house. And they were trying to trick me. They're like, yeah, 25 grand and you can have your own house. And then some guy pulled up next to me and said, don't do it, mate. They're tricking you. They're gonna take the money off you and then give you, bodgy contracts. And then I kept staying there. And then eventually I woke up one morning, going to buy a packet of cigarettes. And they're like, nah, no cigarettes. All right, can I get a sandwich? Nah, we don't have sandwiches. And then I realized they wanted me to leave. The tourist, sort of thing wore off. 3 months it was, and then they're like, "No, we're not making enough money out of you, so just get out of here. You don't belong here." So I get that. Where at the beginning you're the tourist of money, and then after that, the longer you stay and you want to start living like them, they don't like it after a while because you're just not one of them.
No, and it was ever thus. So you're a walking ATM, you're low-hanging fruit, easy pickings, all of those things which they say about foreigners, and a huge death rate. I mean, it's just amazing the number of foreigners. It's true of Britain too, and true of America. The American State Department, sorry, I get that round the wrong way. So the State Department in America refuses to release the number of statistics of Americans who die in Thailand every year.
Wow,
The
that's interesting.
British
Oh,
hold some of the best statistics, and they're only second. Thailand is only second to southern Spain, where they all go to die, in the Costa del Concrete. But
yeah, the
um,
running of the bulls. Yeah, yeah, that's really
it's
interesting. I never thought about that. Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
really high death rate, and yet no travel agent warns anybody. Men are drawn to the nightlife, of course, which is very wild. The lady
Oh
boys,
yeah,
of
yeah, I've
course.
seen all that. There's a big mall in Bangkok. I remember when I saw it the first
You've
time. That
been there, yeah, it's
yeah, oh yeah,
unbelievable.
four stories
Floor
of
after floor.
women with they got numbers on them, and I felt really bad actually. I didn't actually enjoy that part of it, and I just said, oh, this is a bit, it's a bit too much. I actually felt sorry for him, to be honest with you. But
Yeah,
anyway, but
I
Phuket was
spent a
really
lot of
nice.
time with them, you know.
Yeah. Did you ever feel
Sometimes.
any danger when you were there? Did you feel like anything? Anyone
Well,
could?
when I started writing about the country, yeah, absolutely. You die for sure was a really common refrain that I heard, um, when I was writing that book. So you die for sure. And I
Wow.
would never, ever write a book about an Asian country while I was living in
While you were
that
there.
country ever
Yeah.
again.
Do you
It was
remember
just,
that?
yeah.
There was a telly series on Nicole Kidman, Bangkok Hilton. Do you remember that?
No, I've
I
read
think
the
it
book.
was it a book also? Who was the other actor in? And that was, I think it was, she fell in love with an Italian guy, I think it was, in Bangkok, and then he tricked her. He left her some drugs in the bag, and on the way out, she got caught. And it was this whole court case saga where she was, thrown into prison in Bangkok, and it was terrible conditions. That was one of the first things that I saw as a, teenager, and I'm just like, whoa, they don't muck around there. Even though they're very nice people, the court system there is terrible. The
The
bureaucracy
only
and
people in jail in Thailand are people who can't afford to pay their way out. And it used to
oh,
be that
really?
it cost about 20 to 25,000. It's probably a lot higher now,
Yeah.
US dollars to get out. Warren Fellows, there's been a number of great books on being in prison in Thailand, and some of the mules that have been caught, just smuggling from Australia to Thailand. It used to be a major trafficking route from
Yeah.
because of course it made the
What was
books.
the other famous case? Was it Michelle Kirby? Was that in the late
Sorry,
90s? Was there a Michelle Kirby? I can't remember the name. She had
no.
drugs in the surfboard. That was a big case.
Oh no, that was Bali.
Ah, Bali. Sorry, that's right. That's right. There you go.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
No, that was an entirely different story.
That was an entirely different story. Yeah. It's late here.
Yeah,
All right.
entirely.
So what was the reaction of the book in Australia?
Well, it came out at exactly the same time as this very good-looking British couple who had only just met, and they'd just finished college, or no, they were on their college break, university break,
Yeah.
and they met on this island and were really brutally bashed and killed. On the island. So this made
Oh,
front
wow.
page news all over Britain, and the book came out at exactly the same time. So that book got coverage in the Daily Mail, which, unbeknownst to me, they put out, a video of the book, about talking about the book, and they put out press releases in 28 different languages or something, and it went really well, that book. It was just timing, pure timing.
Yep.
And it was called Thailand Deadly Destination, and two of these couples. I mean, there are people being tossed off buildings and old blokes drinking themselves to death. And
Yep.
the standard joke is, found at the bottom of a 24th story condominium. His wallet was missing, as was his girlfriend.
Wow.
His hands were tied behind his back, classified as suicide. It's just constant, that refrain. The Thai police don't investigate those sort of deaths, and it's constant.
Is there?
You should look at some of the statistics on it. It's just unbelievable.
That's really
And
interesting. Do they have like I don't know what it's called in Thailand, but is it some sort of cartel or like an
it's
underground?
well, it's much beloved by the world's mafias. Whether it's Russian mafias or American or everyone. It's like everything you could want in Alice's restaurant is in Thailand, and and people are drawn to it. People buy bars, and as long as you've got lots of money,
You got
and as long as
A
you're
Thai
paying off the
partner?
appropriate people, you can live a really good life, and you can have, you know, as many or as few girlfriends or boyfriends or
Whatever you're
lady
into.
boys as you like. Some of the really most famous um, gangsters have had lady boys, is really gorgeous looking, some of them. So yeah, there's a whole history of mafia in Thailand and the operations of it, and there's been some interesting stuff written about it.
Yeah.
And the Russian mafia played quite a distinct part in it, and they're the thing was the Thai mafia was always very talk too much, and the Russians would just do it in silence and kill the appropriate people. But then again, no one should ever underestimate the Thais for that sort of thing, you know. They all go, they all do military service so that any Thai can fight, you know, any Thai male can fight.
No,
It's
really.
a classic, you know,
The Muay Thai,
and
is it
they
the
can do, they can have you
kickboxing?
on the ground kicking you in like under 60 seconds. It just is a sweep of the foot,
Oh,
so they
wow.
knock you off balance, punch you, and whack your head all at the same time, basically, and you're on the ground, and then they're kicking you. You do not pick a fight with a Thai. That would be my
No,
advice.
no. They know the Muay Thai, the what is it, the kickboxing.
Yeah. That's still
Yeah,
a big lure, you know, and
yeah.
lots of people go, but you know, you really do have to be careful there. Which was the point, I suppose, of the story was that to beware. There are scandals like the rip-offs of the ski thing, you know, and they which has had international coverage in Newsweek and Time and all the rest of it, all around the world, and the still same scam would still be operating day to day. You know, it's just
It's interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's good that you have that that breadth of, like, you just want to pick at things and you want to find out behind the surface. It's really interesting. Some people just go there, have fun on the beach, ride on the tuk-tuk and have more time on the beach and just walk around. And you've just uncovered all this underworld, underbelly.
oh,
Uh,
well, it's just living there. I mean, it's just in front of your face if you live there for very long,
yeah.
as it is for and dangerous, you know. Yeah, and I won't be rushing back.
Wow. All right, we can always pick on that, go back to that in the coming weeks. But let's move on to Terror in Australia, Workers' Paradise Lost. Was that 2015, wasn't it?
Yeah. That was. I just came back from Asia, and it was obvious everywhere that the economy was, you know, Asia is booming. I mean, it's just booming from one end to the other. From Vietnam is booming, Thailand is booming. There's enormous amounts of activity and serious amounts of money flooding through these countries. Serious amounts of money, and you come back here, and the is essentially an impoverished country. You know, there's empty, you know, car yards. Drive down Parramatta Road or the Hume Highway or anywhere really. There's the amount of economic activity is minimal in contrast to Asia. There's
Yeah.
hugely over-regulated country, Australia, and massively expensive. And that's now getting worse. You know, the cost of living, the cost of running businesses and so on is just escalating. So
Yeah.
you're getting the same sort of, even more dramatic now than it was then, but it was really obvious then that the average Australian was essentially impoverished, and that a lot of the businesses were going to the wall or barely hanging on. So it just came out of that initially. And then the big story at the time that the politicians at the time were pumping was terror. You know, Tony Abbott, the Prime Minister at the time, you know, went from, you know, he abandoned any notion of good governance and just flogged the deaf cult in league with the Murdoch media. It was just endless anti-Islamic state and anti-Muslim rhetoric,
Yeah.
which is recurring again now after the Bondi attack. So you've got
Yeah. We need
there are
to
a
talk about that. Yeah.
lot of hidden background to all of this, particularly in the media coverage and the connivance or confluence, connivance really between the conservative politicians and the media, who are all ganging up on or flogging to death this whole Islamic thing. Then
Yeah.
you've got, and it becomes more complicated because the current government's introduced hate laws, which is basically encouraging violence against a particular group, one of the leading and most popular parties at the moment is One Nation, and Pauline Hanson, who's been anti-mass immigration for decades.
Decades,
She's now soaring in the
96.
polls.
30%. I had a look this morning. One Nation's 30%, Labor's 25%. So she's,
Yes, they're going past. Whether or not it translates into seats depends very much on preferences, how the
yeah,
preferences go. But Australia is a country with 32% of the population is born overseas. So the people who are born here are being overwhelmed by the numbers, which are at historic highs of like 450,000 a year or something. It's been it's massive, and the increase and the tensions that it's creating. So at the
yeah.
same time, they've created a social cohesion unit in the federal police, and they've passed these hate laws.
All
Um,
right, well let's delve into that. So I noticed that too because I live overseas and I come back to Australia every year or two. To be honest, when I went back into say 2019, I was actually shocked. Hold on, let's go back to 2013. It was New Year's. I used to go out in the city and I went out to the city and you know for me, even though my parents were migrants, to me it was unfamiliar and I didn't like it. And I wasn't. I just said, who are these people? Who brought them in? To me, it was like that, you know. And this was to 2013. When I went in 2019, it was really unfamiliar for me. So it is a bit strange. I mean, you can't compare migration now to what it was, say, when my dad went to Australia in the late 50s. My dad assimilated into Australian culture, obviously, straight away in Western Australia, worked all his life and passed away in Australia, living as an Australian. So I am a little bit, I gotta be careful here, but um, what happened? Who brought all these people in? There's nothing wrong with migration because the country is all about, immigrants from the Scottish, the Irish, the Dutch, the Italians, the Greek. I get all that, but what I did see was not familiar. It was a lot of
No, it's
people that,
gone from being a
yeah,
very successful immigrant country, Australia. It was really extremely successful, and it's gone from that to basically a polyglot nation without a core. It's become, it's been overwhelmed by the sheer volume of it at the moment.
yeah.
32% of a population born overseas is the highest, as far as I know, anywhere in the world.
Oh, look,
Um,
Egypt. I'll tell you something about Egypt. That's where I am at the moment. They've taken in about 9 million refugees from Syria. Had a revolution 10 years ago. They took in
right, yeah.
millions of them, and then Sudan. What's going on in Sudan? They also took millions. But they do choose the good ones. So the Syrians that I met here that came here and the Sudanese, they're quite rich. They've come over with all this money and they've just bought property, which is giving the Egyptians a hard time, by the way, because now the Egyptians, the price has gone up. But
Mm.
they've come here, they haven't made any trouble. They respect the laws, they're very quiet. They've come with money, they've just bought property, started business, especially the Syrians. They've come and started all these massive factories and stuff. The Egyptians are actually getting a bit annoyed. They're like, all right, well, it's time to go back now. Your country's the war's over. So I get what's going on in Australia, and I wanted to speak about that today. And I think it's fair to ask questions, about the way it's been handled.
But it has a really long history. I mean, the mass migration in Australia started back in the days of Johnny Howard, who was a Conservative Prime Minister loathed by the left, and he made a big show of because there were illegal immigrants coming in by ship, and he made a
Was this
big show
Vietnamese?
of.
Vietnamese or
No, they
back
were
then?
from the Tampa. They were from the Middle East,
Oh,
and
really?
um,
Okay.
and he made a big show of stopping the boats and we control who will come here and all of that. But it was a double blind because at the same time he quadrupled the legal intake. He was strongly advised by people within his own party, Nick Minchin being one of them, that who's a senior figure in right-wing politics,
Yeah.
and he wasn't wrong in saying that it would create massive stress on infrastructure, it would fracture social cohesion, etc., etc. The only people pushing for an increase in the intake was the Chamber of Commerce, the Australian Chamber of Commerce, which is the very big end of town. And they do benefit because you sell more cars, your prices of property go up. If you're on if you're on the right side or whatever side of the ledger where you benefit from all those sort of things like escalating property prices and so on and so forth, well, you think it's a marvellous thing, but um, you fast forward to the present day and it's causing massive stress. It's the single biggest issue in politics at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
It's torn apart the Conservative Party, the Labor Party, who's massively increased the migrant intake, did not take that issue to the electorate when it ran for Parliament. It didn't say that it would be jumping the immigration rates to record highs, dramatically altering the demography of the country, and therefore dramatically altering its future. And I do work with Michael Gray-Griffith of Lockdown,
Yep.
Cafe Lockdown, and he's been travelling. He's been touring the country in a bus, and he goes one town after another. All the small businesses are been bought
Indians.
up by
Indians.
Indians, because
Saw that.
most of the intake at present is from the subcontinent,
Yeah.
and they're being very much encouraged to migrate here. And one survey showed, it was published in the Financial Review, and no one's ever disputed the figure, is that 85% of Indians vote Labor. So they have a really strong motive to continue to do this. It's causing enormous tensions. And
what about the debates about, people talk about homelessness, lack of building new homes? Is it a problem of immigration? Is it a problem of property developers hoarding homes? I'm reading through that to see where the truth is.
Well, it's just creating enormous stress because, you bring in hundreds of thousands of people, you need to build hundreds of thousands of houses. Now,
Homes.
the approvals of housing is dropping. There was a big thing that the government was going to build 1 million houses. But that also creates resentment in the host population because you're basically building 1 million new houses for 1 million new migrants, and that also creates resentment in the host population. So it's been very poorly managed in terms of expectations, in terms of public sentiment, and you don't have to go anywhere now. It's not just tearing the political scene apart but it's it's also curdling the support that multiculturalism once had in Australia. Now in the commentariat, you will get discussion about the failure of multiculturalism, which you never saw before. It was just taken as a creed that it was a success. But
Yeah, Peter Abbott, I think, said once it's not bad.
Sorry?
Peter Abbott said it's not a bad thing, multiculturalism, but it's good for food, and multicultural food and different foods, but it hasn't done much else. I think he said that about 5 years ago, in one of his podcasts. But yeah, it's interesting the way
It,
it's changing.
it's a mixed story, but it's been very badly managed, and there's a huge amount of money involved too, of course,
Yeah.
with visa agents and so on and so forth. So there's lots of people going rich on the back of it, that's for sure. But it's definitely creating enormous stress. Then you've got Bondi, of course, with two
Yep.
Islamic State shooters taking out 15 people celebrating a Jewish Hanukkah. So all of a sudden now the whole Jewish lobby has been exposed as being very powerful in Australia, and that's adding to the stress and the confusion around it all. I mean, they've just referred Pauline Hanson, who is the head of One Nation, now topping the
Federal
polls,
police.
to the federal police for
Yeah,
hate
yeah.
speech because she was asked on a Sky News thing
Are all
about
Muslims bad? Yeah.
Muslims.
Oh, don't it?
It's just unbelievable. There's no such thing as good Muslims, she said. So now
Exactly.
she's been referred to the police, and so that will be a real cracker of dissent. But
Well,
at the
it
same time, you've
complicates.
had people
Yeah,
outside the Opera House chanting "Gas the Jews." So it's just it's unfolding in a really tense and basically very unpleasant way.
there's a
Um,
there's a little thing that I learned years ago at uni. It's called the Hegelian dialectic. Have you heard of that? The Hegelian dialectic
no.
by Frederick George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Now, I'll tell you quickly, this is really interesting, right? He was a German philosopher, and he said, he coined something called the Hegelian dialectic, and it's basically agenda, and then thesis, and then antithesis, and then synthesis. So basically, what's the agenda? And then what's the thesis is basically what's the fear? And then when there's fear, what's the reaction? And then when there's a reaction, there's a new synthesis. So it's basically like Trump was in power, and then Trump got kicked out of power, and then the Democrats came in. They did a really bad job, apparently. Biden couldn't put two words together, so let's bring in Trump. But when you bring in Trump, you lose a lot of the freedoms. That was Frederick's idea. So give them Trump, and then give them the agitator Biden, and then bring Trump back. So, do you think that's happening in politics? Do you think that's like giving them the opposite? I think it's been all through history. Communism, it didn't work. So, what do you give them instead? Capitalism. Or, sorry, even before communism, monarchy didn't work. So, give them communism, whatever country you choose. That didn't work. So, let's go to the opposite, capitalist. It's like give them an agitator and then give them the solution to the agitation and then take away freedoms. That's what he's saying here anyway. I think it's interesting.
I don't know if it's exactly like that. Yeah, I mean, it's a sort of a flow. Australia has more public servants per capita than any other country on earth. And that was a study that just came out this week. We're being cramped and killed by this level of endless regulation, endless lawmaking, and an absolute failure to listen to the common sense views of the great unwashed, basically, who aren't very happy with the enormous level of taxation, with the enormous level of regulation, and with the fact that their views are dismissed so readily by the elites as unsophisticated. And it's a mess. I mean, I think it's a mess.
So what are
It would
these
be
hate
nice.
speech laws about? What do they actually mean? Or is it good for Australia? Is it bad for Australia? Is it trying to keep the peace? Is it trying to say, okay, we had something terrible happen in Bondi. Now we don't want everyone hating one another, so we're going to impose a law to make sure that everyone doesn't have a go at one another. Is that what the
Well, you
initial?
could almost do a piece in a Bondi in the rear vision mirror, and this was one of the consequences of it. And it was pretty much insane. It's had really hostile reaction from from all sides of politics, basically, from the pro-Palestinian mobs in the street who've been arrested and pepper sprayed and arrested. You haven't seen that sort of full-on pepper spraying in people's face and that level of police violence basically since the COVID lockdowns and the anti-vaccine mandate marches of 4 years ago. You haven't seen that level of police interference and well, they're calling it police brutality. You haven't seen that until today, until now, really. Um, and on the other side of politics has just torn them apart. So you've seen this complete rupture in Australian politics. The Conservatives and the Conservative coalition, which in Australia is the Liberals and the Nationals, they broke up over the hate speech laws. They separated.
Yeah.
So because the Nationals, which basically is the country party, couldn't abide it. So you've had the two mainstream parties, Labor and Liberal, both vote for it, and basically much of the community really hostile to it. It was jammed through Parliament in a single day. They had an amended act on that morning, so nobody could feasibly have read it properly. 99.99999% of the Australian public have not read that bill and just fear it but don't know it. So far, we've had one man locked up for a 45-second anti-Jewish rant at a rally. 45 seconds, he got a year in jail. Someone else, I haven't followed this, but someone else was jailed for a tweet. You're heading the way of Britain, basically, where there's now 12,000 people per annum,
Wow.
if I've got that right, that are being arrested and charged with Facebook posts and social media posts, so we're heading straight down the same path. It's we've also got the under 16 social media ban,
Social media ban,
which
yeah.
is just basically censorship. Kids are smart; they've worked their way around it really quickly, but it's this endless push for censorship and control, and not to trust the public to say what's on their mind. Governments would have been way better off if they had listened to the voices of discontent over not just Islamic migration, but the rates of migration. If they had listened and learnt to manage those, not just to manage, but to respond to those concerns of people who seeing their wages flatten and their rents soaring and so on and so forth. The government would have been a damn sight better listening to them rather than trying to censor them. This has been going on for years. I mean, years. It's they've just ignored all the protests.
Yep.
Years ago, I mean, we're talking probably 10 years ago, there was a huge number of groups, True Blue Boys and all those sort of groups that were very strongly anti-mass immigration, and they were all shut down off Facebook. They're shut down in the streets in a precursor to some of the more extreme police action we've seen in recent years. If the government had listened to those concerns and realised that there was a gathering discontent about the situation, we wouldn't be where we are today. But they've chosen instead to crack down on dissent, which has, I think, been really the wrong way to go. And we shall see. Now, now they've charged one of Australia's most famous politicians, or they're talking of charging, with hate speech.
Yep.
This thing could go anywhere.
Yeah, that's really interesting. All right, what about the Royal Commission into the Bondi attack? Apparently that's
Oh, well,
going
that's an
ahead.
absolute farce.
Commissioner
It's not a
Bell.
royal. It's not a royal commission into the Bondi thing. It's a royal commission into social cohesion, which is exactly the agenda that the government wants to push. You know, they've just created this federal police unit called the Social Cohesion Unit, and they're holding a royal commission on social cohesion, which is not really much to do with the Bondi thing. I mean, there's plenty of people think the Bondi event was a false flag. Whether or not that's true, we don't know, but there's certainly been that sort of talk about. But they're not investigating those sort of things. They're not investigating all the so-called Islamic hate preachers out west. They're not investigating Islamic State in Australia, which, you know, they're banning, or they're talking of banning, a group called Hizb ut-Tahrir, which are basically the kind of the intellectual wing of the jihad movement in a way. They've been out in the Australian suburbs for decades, preaching the overthrow of the government and the institution of theocracy. But if you go to their events, which I've been to a number of them as a reporter, the town hall events are really powerful, like really powerful. Ask yourself, my brothers, in a mix of English and Arabic, ask yourself, my brothers, ask yourself, my sisters, why has Allah been so cruel as to cast you amongst the unbelievers? And the answer, of course, is to bring Islam to Australia. So it's a really powerful message. But if you go to their community events, it's no more frightening than a Presbyterian gathering in the 50s, And ironically, they don't drink, they don't smoke, they don't
Yeah.
take drugs, they're loyal to their wives, they take very good care of their children. In many, many ways, they're model citizens. And
Yeah.
they really prize education, both amongst the men and the women. So it's a really, but now they're talking of banning them, as they've done periodically at times of unrest before, but they never have actually banned them. Now they are actually talking of banning them, which I don't see how you can go ahead and ban a group which have been out there actively saying exactly the same things for decades as they are now, and who are very well accepted and respected within the Islamic community, the Muslim community in Australia. So really quite senior Muslim people have spoken up in defence of them, and they have a very powerful message that Australia, the sooner we're an Islamic state, and the better.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting.
And their criticism of multiculturalism, which is interesting too, because people assume that that they're on board with it, is that if you believe in everything, you believe in nothing. So they're a fascinating group. I just absolutely fail to see how the government can proceed to ban them. And I don't think even if they do, that it will make the slightest bit of difference. They'll still go on having their meetings. What are they going to do? Raid these halls of people at prayer? Are they really going to do that? What happens? Are you going to raid the prayer halls of the Jehovah's Witnesses who are all waiting for the second coming of Christ? Like, where does it end?
Where does it end?
It's, it's, I don't know. I can't see it. So the Royal Commission, to get back to that, they appointed the most left-wing member of the High Court to run it, and Virginia Bell, and it's a stitch-up. No government ever holds an inquiry unless they know the answer. And it's a maxim of government, never hold an inquiry unless you know the answer. And that's exactly what they're doing. They have no intention of listening. In the meantime, there's been protests in Australia, marches around the country, and so on and so forth, that people really opposed to what's going on. So it's a mess, mate.
It's a mess. What about, just before we move on to one of your other books, because we're going to need a part two and a part three, John. What about Chinese immigration? There's a lot of Chinese immigration recently. I mean, Chinese
Yeah, there
immigration
was
is
a
almost,
great book by Clive Hamilton called The Silent Invasion, Chinese Influence in Australia, which he was like the ultra left wing academic who works for the Australia Institute. And he writes really interestingly about Chinese influence in Australia and the backlash that he got from his equally left wing academic colleagues, which was that basically he couldn't get the book published. He's written 15 books or something. Allen and Unwin, his normal publisher, wouldn't publish it. And the only way that he got it into the public domain was he attached it to a government inquiry on immigration, if I got that right. He attached it he submitted as part of a government inquiry. And because it was then made public, they gave up trying to stop publishing it, and he got it published. So it's a very interesting read, actually, really interesting.
yeah.
So
So there's all sorts of things we can touch up, pick up
yeah,
next
I'd
time.
love to
So
know what he thought about the current scandals around it all.
wow,
So
that'd be interesting. So immigration, social cohesion, we've spoken about that a little bit on Pauline Hanson. Just maybe one more book before we go. This is really interesting, John. You're very addictive. There's a book called Hideout in the Apocalypse, and that's an interesting one. So that's the surveillance crushing the Australian larrikin culture. That sounds about about what's about to happen or what is happening.
Oh, I know that. Yeah, I was in very prophetic mode when I
You're a
wrote those
pioneer.
books.
You're avant-garde. It's all avant-garde, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's been a long time coming, all of this, I tell you. It's been, how do you achieve a totalitarian state, or an authoritarian state? And the answer is always one step at a time and then in a great rush, and that's what's happened in Australia. We're now into the great rush thing with the hate speech laws and the hate speech laws is just so outrageous in a country like Australia where,
I'm just a bit confused about the hate speech laws. I looked at it like, oh, it's not a bad thing. It's going to stop people from hating one another. They're going to be scared to hate, but apparently not. I'm not sure.
oh,
I
absolutely
still
not.
don't get it. Yeah.
It's had a huge backlash, and people
Does that mean there's a backlash because we want to continue hating or the division or I still don't really get it.
they jammed these stupid laws through Parliament in a single day without consulting anybody.
Okay.
They didn't consult the Muslim community. It's labelled an anti-Semitic, laws on anti-Semitic, which means that the weaponisation of the whole anti-Semitism rave in Australia is another story altogether. But that it's
I
been.
was listening to 2GB yesterday, and I think it was Fordham who said, if you're going to do that, then you're going to have to ban John Farnham's "River to the Sea" song. Two strong hearts, we stick together like honey and the bee. And then there's a river to the sea part there, isn't it?
I didn't know
You
you
and
could.
me.
Uh,
This is
Look, I'm
great.
in the local newspaper office, so I'm holding up events
All
here,
right,
so I
all
better
right.
get going. But
Absolute pleasure, John. We're
yeah,
gonna have to do this
yeah.
again and talk about your other books. You've got another, I think, 5 books to go through. So, absolute pleasure talking to you. You've been listening to Hashem's podcast. John Stapleton from Australia. Thank you. I'll speak to you soon, guys. Bye.
Yeah. Thanks very much. See you
See
later.
ya.
Ciao.
Enjoyed that. See ya.
Bye.